Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone, and we'll call our special meeting of March 3rd to order. For the record, it is 1:04. If you'll call roll, please.
Mayor Pro-Tem.
Present.
Councilmember Hunt.
Here.
Councilmember Quincy. Here. Councilmember Tao.
Here. Mr. JR, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Approval of the agenda, Council?
So moved.
We have a motion, we have a second.
Second.
Call for the vote, please.
Councilmember Hunt.
Yes.
Councilmember Tao.
Yes.
Councilmember Quincy. Yes.
And the next matter is matters from staff and the lodging tax funding and LEDIBU funding. And Councilor Peralta, I'm going to turn this over to you because I think there was a motion on the floor to table this item and we have to bring it back on the table. If I understand right, that's correct?
I move that we remove item 6A from the table and make it the next order of business.
Do we have a motion to that? Do we have a second?
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, call for the vote.
Councilmember Tao.
Yes.
Councilmember Hunt.
Yes.
Councilmember Quincy. Yes.
So, discussion and direction, consideration, possible approval in regards to marketing events using lodging tax funding and LEDIBC funding. You want to address that, Councilor? Or should we have?
No, I can address it. The issue that we had when we tabled this was the concern that I had, and I think other members of the council also, but my concern was that funding this in this fiscal year was too short a time period to be effective. And so my thought was that we should use this in next fiscal year, or would be from June through December for events that we have. Now, the lodging tax funds, and I need to ask Rick some questions on this so that we can understand where the funding is, but lodging tax funding may still be a little bit that we could use this year between now and June. The LED funding we can't because we have to, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But on that, it's a question as to whether or not we have any lodging tax funds available this fiscal year, because we pretty well used up a lot of them in prior commitments that we had back in January and first part of February. So let's take the lodging tax funding first and see where we're at on that. But let me give you my reasons for looking at long term. I just feel that we need to make sure that we give enough time to events to properly market them so that the impact is what we expect it to be for the funding we put into it. And one of the things that I discussed after the meeting also with Rick, and I think you were there, Fritz, when we discussed that next year's funding that we put in the budget, we should consider events that take place after January 1st through December 30th of 2016. And that's so that we get plenty of lead time for people to put their program together in the fall of this year, so from July through December. They put their program together, and then we start funding at the first of the year, so that the impact then is what we expect it to be as far as being able to generate economic stimulus within the community. But I think that since we have so few funds, we have to be really frugal on how we use them and make sure that events that we fund are possible. So let me turn it over to you, Rick, for a minute, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, Marietta, could you come forward?
I'm just going to pass out this.
Thanks, Marietta. And while we're doing that, I just wanted to thank Councilman Peralta for bringing this back, and it's as I had indicated to him in our last phone conversation, I appreciate the fact that he's been so patient and diligent with us on resolving a number of issues revolving around this funding, and some of which we have not created, but the lack of a clear interpretation from DFA and the state in regards to what they came upon in Las Cruces, the anti-donation issues, the procurement issues, and being patient with us and giving his experience at tourism and the fairgrounds and helping us come up with a good long-term approach to this. So with that, Marietta.
Good morning, Mayor, council members, town manager. Councilmember Pat Alta, just to give you a summary on that Fund 23, which is the lodger's tax. We started with a reserve amount of $142,887, and we have 2 years to spend that. We've allocated $50,000 for, I just put anniversary events, and I'm not going to name everything out, and then $15,000 for, I think it was the Arts Council, if I'm wrong or right, I think pretty much that's what that is, and so we have a balance in that fund of $77,887, and that's just the beginning fund reserve amount. That's not any ongoing revenues and expenditures for the current year. So that's just a really quick summary on the lodger's tax fund. The next one is just the one-time operating costs, Fund 53. We moved $2,500 now at mid-year, so that's going to bring that one economic development events up to $84,614. And then we do have a remaining amount of $8,000 in the executive budget for economic development events. So between everything, there's $142,613, but obviously the $50,000 is set aside for the arts, not the arts, the anniversary events, which we would still have to procure if they're not just straight advertising. So that's just a really quick summary. I left the 15 out because that's pretty much set aside for that, which we also have to procure, but you know, more specific to one generalized art events, I guess you would say.
Okay,
Questions?
back to Rick.
Okay. I'm like, cut? Okay.
So, well, one quick question, Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Please.
Of the 77,000, have you identified it as to how old it is?
No, I haven't.
Because it revolves a little bit, correct?
Right. It's sort of a revolving door, and I think this is the first year I'm going to start now, like brand new, and start okay from this amount to the current year and going forward. Because in the previous years, that really hasn't been tracked in that way. I know just recently, this last year in our reporting, we have the report that says now we have 2 years to spend. We're in previous reporting from DFA, that was never on there. So I don't know if they changed the requirements that you have 2 years to spend that balance prior to this last current year.
So at the end of this fiscal year, what do you anticipate that we will have over budget that would go into the reserve fund? Do you have any idea yet?
Well, based on the budget figures, but we've already decreased those somewhat. I was expecting maybe another 30,000, but then we already decreased the revenues.
So you're not expecting anything?
I'm not expecting anything. Okay. And it'll be easier to track now this year, knowing exactly, starting fresh.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, Rick, then what do you think that we should maintain in this reserve fund? I'm just saying because if we have a shortfall, let's say, for example, at the end of this year, or in other words, because we've anticipated a certain amount of money to be spent from now until June 30th, and if we're short that and revenues coming in, we have to have a little bit of
Councilman, Mr. Mayor, what I would suggest is that the $8,000 that's under the executive budget, Fund 11, could be transferred. It could be held, and if necessary, transferred in to bring up that balance if in fact we have no cash balance resulting from the performance of the lodger's tax at the end of the year. And depending how you use that 84, the same thing. And I agree with your original assertion that if we're going to spend anything between now and July 1, that it should be used as marketing advertising dollars to support events. As far as the individual amount, the fund has, it's kind of a catch-22 because the hotels have underperformed, I'm sorry, the accommodations in the budget have overperformed as a sector of the economy for all of this year so far, and most of all of last year, as I recall. So we're sort of in the position of how do we reverse that trend? And the only real tool we have to reverse that, other than development of a tourism plan to get the hotels all on the same page, and it really is to invest money into events that we can anticipate would return, would book hotel rooms, and thus generate lodger's tax and GRTs.
So I didn't get an answer to my question.
No, you didn't. I'm not good at forecasting.
Well, no, I'm just saying, but I mean, do we keep 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 in that reserve fund because we may need it next year?
I don't know that I'd spend more than $40,000 out of that $77,000. But like I said, we could move that $8,000 or a portion of, in Fund 11 or a portion of 53 back in there if we see that we're not having any effect this spring by holding events, and that the trend in accommodations is something we don't control, and it's going to continue to spiral down and bring lodger's tax funds down with it. And as you're aware, Councilman, we're looking at other things that might lessen the demand on those funds. You know, of course, it's up to the council how you would want to reprogram those funds. But just as last year we moved a couple of things out, the staff that were charged to that account for the convention, the finance director and myself continue to look at ways on the transportation portion and the visitor center portion that would free up more dollars to actually be spent on advertising and marketing.
And I know what you're talking about, but I'm just looking and saying, okay, if there would be $37,000, $38,000 that could be spent, possibly, depending upon what sort of a project comes before us to fund. Between now and June 30th.
Well,
I mean, a number of projects, I'm not,
yeah.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I mentioned one.
You know, I think we have a fair estimate based on the presentations that have been made to the council as to what the events are that are going to happen between now and June 30th, and I don't think that's violating the sanctity of the RFP. Should we do it to say that, you know, we've received a representation from Mother's Day, and that the mayor's been very clear publicly that he would like to seek about $6,000 in marketing funding for that event, or however best for us. The other one would be the Lilac Festival, and I think they were looking for somewhere between $6,000 and $10,000 in support. The one variable on that is they've received a grant of $15,000 for New Mexico Tourism to publicize that, and they're doing that through Joni Griffin, and we would want to be sure that we didn't duplicate what was already in that grant.
Is that grant required to have a match?
It is, yes, it's a 1-for-1, so we could in fact
Match
help them out that way. Yes, and since that grant has to be an approved Mexico True campaign, and Joni has already set it up that way, it wouldn't be very difficult to just say, we'll help you out on the match side. The work's already done. And then the other event would be Solar Fest, and I think they were looking for somewhere between, they were looking for $15,000 in marketing and a maximum of $30,000 in support. Clearly, we've indicated at this point we're not ready to do financial support, just marketing.
Any other questions? Any other questions from any of the council?
And just to total that up, that would fit within that $37,000.
And again, we have a number of people that have already come to us, and that's a good analogy, Mr. Bellis. And the other one on the agenda is part of this, and we'll get to it later. I think you will, Councilor. Just want to, I know that there's that opportunity, and a lot of these entities try to come to us early, knowing that there's possibility of funding, and if they can apply for funding, then they can start planning their venues, because without some forecast, it's hard to tie down a promoter or somebody that's wanting to come to Taos, or like the Congos that came before, they were coming through, and it just happened that it all happened just right, that that they had the backing, and everybody was good with it, because it was just a fluke thing that they were coming through our community and they agreed to do an event. But long-term planning is, as you mentioned, Councilor Peralta, is the way to go for a lot of these, so that they can have a set venue, and they can actually go out and say, okay, these are people are available, we have the money to lock them in, and it's an opportunity for our community to continue to put heads in beds and people in our community that are spending money. I hate to lose any of these events to our neighboring communities. I don't want to spell it out, but hate for somebody to, I know that they're trying to bring one of the events down from the Ski Valley to our community, and I think we're better suited for some of these events. And we have the opportunity for people to stay here, and the excitement that comes with a lot of these events. So that's my 2 cents.
Mr. Mayor, I think we can say that because our opposition out there, our competition already knows that 2 of the events, maybe 3 of them, after those other communities in our region heard that we might not fund events, have made pitches to those events to bring them up there. So it would be really helpful if we could offer something to them to try to keep them here.
Any other comments from council? Not turn back to you.
Well, I have a couple of questions, and they may be a little bit off here, but I ran into Richard Archuleta a couple of days ago, and I had asked him, because he'd been asking me about applying for Rogers tax money to help with the advertising for the powwow. And when I ran into him a couple of days ago, he said, well, I went to town hall, and somehow he didn't get an application. He felt like he was misdirected, and I'm not real sure who he spoke to.
He spoke to me.
What was the confusion on that?
I don't know. I told him the process that we were going to go through, that we were going to do this RFP, and that was the process that we were looking at. And I said as soon as that comes out, then we would inform him. We have all his information. And he seemed to pretty much understand that that was going to be the process. And so I told him it looked like maybe end of February, early March. And so he was very cordial, and I took it that he understood that, he would have to follow the process like everybody else. So he talked directly with myself and Sharon. I got Sharon in and let him know about it.
Okay, so it's still possible for him to apply?
Well, there's only, if we do an RFP, I don't think we're doing an internal application for anything else. I think it's one for all or none for all, or none for none, or whatever you want to say. But I think we have to give everybody that same opportunity to apply for whatever their needs, maybe for any kind of event that they want, big, small, medium, large. So if that's the process or not the process, then I think staff internally for procurement purposes, you know, we need to know, and I think I said this at the meeting, if we're going to do just blank advertising dollars, then obviously that's exempt for procurement, but who's going to pick and choose what we're going to advertise for? You know, I don't know who's going to make that decision. If it's us, not me, but for sure not me. I would just give them, you know, it's just that we have to meet some kind of criteria. If it's exempt for advertising, put it out in the Taos News, or you put it out in a publication of sort, and you have town logo and we're sponsoring that, that's all good, but that's all about we can do if we're not going to do an official RFP for some of these things that they may need support and advertising to it.
Mr. Mayor, Councilwoman, yeah, that's really why we're here today, because last year what happened was all we could really do was we did a full page ad, whether we did it once or twice, that we tried to include the rodeo, the powwow, the fiestas, kind of by using our internal advertising budget to advertise all the events, because we had no process in place to be able to fund any of them. And again, I appreciate that Councilman Peralta put this back on the agenda, with realizing that we would have had, the way it was left, I had no direction for staff as to how we were going to do Mother's Day or any of the spring events. And we would have been backed in a corner waiting for the new budget to come in on July 1 before we could have done anything for fiestas and powwow, rodeo, any of the events that occurred after July 1. So it's that hope by solving the procurement issue that you as council can give direction to staff that we can modify that RFP and put out a fair announcement to everybody to let everyone come in and say, hey, I've got this event. And sometimes you need to advertise it well before the event happens to get that impact. And we'll bring those events back to you as council with a recommendation as to what they're asking for, and you can vote on that.
Okay.
When is powwow?
It's the second weekend in July.
Mayor, if I could, please. It goes back to my first comments, though, you know, and that is that we have a number of summer and fall events that take place after the 1st of July. And some of those need to be marketed now, I mean, you know, May, June, that sort of thing. And if we give the $37,000 to events prior to that, how do we fund those things that we feel are potential tourist drivers to heads and beds that are happening after that? If they have to wait till July 1st, it may be too late to market some of those as well. That's the critical kind of dilemma we're in. Do we do something that's already short-ranged and my concern is not going to be very effective, or do we say that we're not going to do anything that has a date prior to July 1st, but use these funds for anything for the rest of the fiscal, or the rest of the calendar year, which would bring up anything from July through December 31st, which is like Plaza or Fall Arts Festival, powwow, or tourism. I mean,
Good point.
the other types of events that are out there that are looking for something to support them. And this is, I'm just looking right now and talking about the lodgers tax dollars. And from what you indicated, if we do something in the transportation arena, then that does free up quite a bit of money to put back into the market. But that would be for calendar year 2016. And then we really created a fund going forward to market. Because one of the things that I've said before is that if we're not going to create a 5-year plan at least of funding for ongoing things to happen, to fund events, it doesn't have to be the same event every year. But if we don't create something that is going to be continuing support, I don't think that we're going to get people interested in really continuing their programs if we don't do that. But up until this point, we really haven't created that policy that can move forward. We need to do that. And so, and if we're going to do that, we have to assure ourselves that the funding that we provide for this is going to be meaningful. And because, like I said before, we just don't have that many dollars to play with. But I think there's some things that we can do to help. But I don't know that it's a real concern that I have that we've got to figure a way that we can properly promote things going forward in a time frame that really makes people adjust their schedules to come to visit us and want to see these things and not be too late for their setting up their schedules. So that's what I'm looking at here. The second half of this I'll talk about in just a minute, but we need to finish this.
And thank you for that, Councilor Peralta, because, as people set their schedules, that they know that, that they can go on the website and they know there's going to a certain time of year, there's going to be a concert, there's going to be a barn dance, or there's going to be a Mother's Day celebration. And so people can plan their schedules around that they know that this is happening in Taos. Let's go to Taos, let's plan to be in Taos for this weekend or these 3 days because it's fun, and hopefully we can find a way to address that and move that forward.
Yeah, I would just suggest that between the 37, if we took that out of marketing, the 8 and 84, there's 130,500, and that it may very well be that it might be helpful to agree to funding advertising or whatever costs for Paseo, Fiestas, powwow now to get appropriate advertising out and to try to coordinate that advertising. But it would seem that we should be able to do that because the 84, the Fund 53 and the Fund 11 are totally unrestricted as to how you use them. And that should be able to get us to July 1, which then if you budget another 100,000, and then in December 31st, you have 100, depends on what you want to allocate out of that transportation fund, but you have about 160.
Maybe so.
My question though is if we take the 84,000 or whatever is there and put it into advertising, I'm not sure it has the same ability as lodgers tax by law says you can use this for any kind of marketing. When we're going to general fund dollars, I don't know that we have the same leeway or ability to do it that way. It's kind of goes back to what was told to us about if it's not our deal, we can't support it. Lodgers tax is different because in the law it specifically states that it's to be used for anything that will attract tourism. When we go into general fund dollars, I don't know that we have that same ability. And that's a clarification you need to have, but from what I've seen in responses to our question, if it isn't ours, don't do it. So, for example, your project that you were thinking about for doing
The yard sale and
yard sale and Cesar Chavez, since that would be our project, we can do it with limitations. And those limitations are that we have to involve procurement for all of our things that we do. But that's the difference. And so when we get into something where somebody else is the promoter, I think we have a few more restrictions. And that's where I'm trying to figure out how we use that second money without saying, let's just put it in advertising. It may not work.
Yeah, unless we do something where we're doing the advertising like we did last year, which was, we took out a page as generally paying for advertising that was publicizing the town and the events and tourism in it. But I agree with you that no matter what we do on that 84, whatever approach we take, we should really use an RFP approach to make it a fair process to bring people in, to solve the procurement issue. But we are going to have that issue, and you and I talked about that with Farmers Market and with the fiestas and possibly Mother's Day. But I don't know any of those folks necessarily would oppose the idea that it's the town farmers market, and then, as you and I have talked about, we hire someone to manage that. It did seem from Randy Van Black's opinion that we can, if we identify the specific event and advertise for that, we can take a promoter, and I think the gentleman from Santa Fe, and that's why I asked Linda to be here, heads of Procurement Association, indicated that you could sole source somebody to do a farmer's market or a fiesta and say they're the only person available, and of course they would have to publish it for the 30 days, which we would have time to do. But again, I'll defer to you on these issues.
Well, the problem is, even with the farmer's market, there seems to be two factions already in town that want to have a farmer's market, so I don't know that it qualifies as a sole source.
Well, I think we've worked that out.
Well, I don't know if we have or not, but I'm just saying that I don't know that I want to get into the business end of this thing. I can understand us doing some events, but I don't think I want to, personally, I don't feel that we should be in the business of a farmer's market. And even at that, there's still an issue, and we talked about it as far as the anti-donation clause is, that when people pay to be vendors in the farmer's market, that money has to come into us and we have to make a profit. And if we don't get fair market value for the use of our facilities, then we're in violation again. So it's not like just hiring somebody and then letting them do their thing and get all the money. It doesn't work that way. And it's the same thing if we are going to promote an event that isn't ours and it's ticketed, we have to get some return for that investment, or we're in violation again. So this is kind of, where we come to that thing, what Randy says is that if you're the promoter on the event, you're doing the event, then and it's not a ticketed event in a sense, then there's a little bit of a different deal on it. I mean, the idea going into one is that if you are ticketing, such as when we had concerts at the fair, the idea was, yes, we're going to make some money off of this in order to pay the necessary costs of running a fair. And that was the reason that you did these things. Or, for example, if we rented out a hall for somebody to have a car show, we had to make sure that what we rented it for paid for the value of the facility and all of the other things that go along with it, clean up, utilities, and that sort of thing. So all those things were valued, and that's the same thing. And I don't know that we have the manpower or that to get into some of this stuff that we would love to see continue and prosper, but I don't think that's our availability at this point.
Mr. Mayor, Council, could I make a suggestion that staff could revise the RFP? I still think we're not going to be able to find one answer that's going to answer everything everybody's going to propose to us. But if we could revise the RFP to identify two pots of money, people that are just asking for marketing dollars, and it would be my suggestion that we make it very clear that they bring us whatever the advertising list is, and that we would procure that advertising on their behalf. Not that we physically give them money or get back into this, what constitutes proof of payment. And then the second one would be that we would give a brief explanation of, if that's even possible, of anti-donation and suggest to them some options, then let those events come forward and propose something, and then staff could meet, and some probably just wouldn't be possible for us to do. But there might be some that we could find explanations for of how we could participate, and that we could recommend those back to council along with the marketing ones. And you could, at that point, and as you're aware, Councilman, we're still asking New Mexico Tourism to try to get an opinion for us, since they've got money out there in these events too. Hopefully by then, we would have an idea of what events are available, what real needs are out there. We could probably move the marketing ones that are coming up fairly quick, very easily, and then bring that opinion back to you, well, the other information, and whatever council felt comfortable with at that point. They could either fund or not fund.
Mr. Mayor, just one quick note on that with the tourism department and a discussion that I have with you as well, Rick, and that is, you know, it's the tourism department gives us money, but they kick the can about whether how you use it is legitimate or not.
That's true.
They don't necessarily tell you that. They just say, okay, it's up to you to decide what you're doing with those dollars that we give you meets the statutes on procurement and anti-donation. So, you know, it's like saying, yeah, well, this is okay, but, you know, if something goes wrong, our hands are clean. So,
State mandates.
so I, you know, Mr. Mayor, I really think that on the RFP going forward, I would suggest that that we truly look primarily at projects or events that are happening in the second half of the fiscal year. And unless there is a dire need to cover something in this fiscal year, and then we would look at that. But I think the primary thing that because we don't have that many dollars, and we need to start promoting some of those things that are happening in the second half of the fiscal year, is that we look at those, you know, but not restrict that strictly to that type of an RFP. People can put an RFP, but we'll be very diligent about looking at whether or not we feel it is a viable project to be funded this year or not. For this, for this first half of the year. And so I think we go that way, but I also would like to, as part of the, and this is outside the motion. Let me finish that as a motion, see if there's any discussion or second on that motion.
Let me second Councilman Peralta's motion for purposes of discussion and clarification.
Discussion, go ahead.
Councilman, I heard you say that the emphasis would be in the second half of next fiscal year. That would, so I need clarification.
It would be the second half of the calendar year.
Okay.
July 1st to
Oh, okay.
31st.
So the first half of the new fiscal year.
What it would be, we would also take a look at some things that may happen in the first half of the calendar year that, you know, we really feel strongly we need to catch up, we'll do it. But since we have such limited dollars, we need to make sure that we're producing and looking at the event, when it takes place, how many days it has, and you know, all those different factors that we've already talked about as far as what is going to drive heads and beds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council.
No, I just appreciate your recommendation because, you know, there's so many things that are unforeseen that, you know, we need to consider that and have funding for something that could be a success and we just don't know what it is yet. So, thank you.
So we have a motion, a second, we've had some discussion. What's the wishes of the council?
Mr. Mayor, could I just get a clarification? Councilman, are you identifying just that 37,000 in lodger's tax or that
Plus.
full 130?
Plus.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm going to make a second clarification after this vote is over, okay?
Thank you.
So, no further discussion? Call for the vote.
Councilman Peralta?
Yes.
Councilman Reynolds?
Yes.
Yes.
Councilman?
Mr. Mayor, one of the things that I'd like to do at this time is that we do have an events coordinator, And I know it's part-time because she takes care of library issues as well. But I think there's some events that the town would like to do. And I think, Mr. Bellis, you have some things that you feel there are some events that the town should sponsor. I would think that if there are some things that we could do in the fall, such as the event that Councilmember Cantu was talking about, that under our sponsorship, that we could look at those and put those together quickly for this calendar year. And then also what I would like to suggest as part of our diligence in looking at the budget for next calendar, fiscal year. I get my calendar. Right. But in that, as part of our policy for the budget, that the monies that we budget that would be used for events in calendar year 2016. So unless there is a real need for assisting in the events at the second half of the fiscal year, we really look at that as a budgetary policy. That's just a recommendation at this point. We can't make an adjustment. Just keep that in mind for when we budget. Your mind's clear as mud?
Well, pretty much. But, you know, I'm slow, so could you throw that one by me again?
Well, what I'm saying is that what we should look at when we budget, any monies that we're setting aside for promotion of events, either by marketing monies or general fund monies to sponsor events, that we look at as part of the budgetary policy, that we will do RFPs sometime in July, August, but for things that are going to happen in 2016, not 2015.
So at least a 6-month lead time is what I hear you say. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think we'll get a better bang for our buck. And there's some things that could happen in the winter, during spring break and that sort of thing that we could tap onto, but not giving enough lead time, I think we would lose our momentum, our potential.
Is that clear enough direction, Mr. Bellis? So that
Absolutely.
we have some, good staff direction.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. So does that pretty much cover all of A?
I believe so.
All right. Thank you, Marietta. I do want to, before we go on, the council, and it does speak to this, and I know that Linda has been doing some research on the anti-donation. Do you want to fill us in on anything you've learned, or you haven't learned enough, or it's all right? I mean, if you haven't, I don't want to put you on the spot because I know there's a lot out there.
Well, I've passed everything on to Rick at this point. I think that the plan is to summarize it and give it to council when we feel like we've gotten a really good opinion.
Okay. All right. So right now we're just collecting some data of what other communities are doing and that type of stuff. So we just.
And Mr. Mayor, there's a procurement conference coming up, which the gentleman that's the head of the procurement affiliate, Santa Fe, thought would be a good opportunity. It appears other people have the same questions, and that's in 23rd or something of March, down in Ruidoso. So we will definitely make a point of going down there and putting these questions forward along with the other communities.
But I did just want to add one thing. The gentleman that I spoke to in Santa Fe that is very knowledgeable about procurement did say that Santa Fe lines out all of their events ahead of time, and they do an RFP for a promoter and who handles all of the events. So, and I think I heard a question about whether or not we could do that, have someone promote it for us, and it sounds like that's certainly something that we can do. Again, I don't feel like I'm knowledgeable enough
Okay.
to.
Sorry. You're just gathering information.
We are, and you have said some things that were very true. If it is our event, I mean, we can certainly do that. We can also certainly RFP for events, not name those events, but if we wanted to have 3 music events in a year and we have 3 groups come forward, then that's within the law to be able to do that. So, I don't know, Rick, did you want to add anything?
That darn Las Cruces.
Mr. Mayor, it's not that. I mean, you know, as far as entertainers are concerned, whether it's a band or an individual, they're exempt from procurement because they're a sole source. I mean, there's only one, you know, particular entertainer, so that's the reason for that. However, the things that go on around them have to be procured. Now, you can hire a promoter to go out and find events for you, but when you, or entertainment, if you want to do that, or any other kind of event, you can hire them, but then you come back to the procurement as to how you're going to handle specifically doing that. Now, that being said, we do have somebody in-house that we could use as a promoter. Or you can hire a contractor. I mean, we did when we were at State Fair, we hired an outside promoter contractor to find entertainers for us for the fair. And we paid a specific amount of money to do that. But after that was done, then everything else was handled in-house. So there's different ways of doing it. Just depends on how much you want to spend. Or can afford to spend.
Right, and when I was speaking to the gentleman from Santa Fe, they literally they will line up 60 different events, and they're across the board. I mean, everything from arts and crafts to music to the fiestas, everything. And then they go out to RFP for their promotion, and they handle everything from that point on. So, anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll go on to the next item, appointment of a Mayor Pro-Tem. You know, we are basically running and make sure everybody gets an opportunity to do this, and you know, it's everybody will get an opportunity through the year. So it's you know, who wants it? Get strapped with.
I already had my chance.
Commissioner, Councilman Gonzalez is just finishing up his term, and so we do need somebody.
Do you want to do heads or tails, Fritz?
Makes no difference to me.
Who's got a coin?
I don't have a coin.
Who's got a deck of cards? Who has a die?
Rock, paper, scissors.
Okay. That works.
Remember how to play rock, paper, scissors? Now this should be in the paper. This is a first. All right, Judy. So let's see. So wait, listen. The rule is 1, 2, 3, boom.
Yep.
Okay, so it's rock, paper, scissors. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, again, this is the most fun I've had up here. Ready? 1, 2, 3. No.
Okay.
Rock, break, scissors.
I guess you win.
Oh boy. Be still my beating heart.
Make a motion that Councilmember Hahn become the Mayor Pro-Tem for the next 6 months.
Do I have a second to that motion?
I'll second.
And I have a second to that motion. Call for the vote.
Councilmember Pendleton?
Yes.
Councilmember Country?
Yes.
Councilmember Pendleton?
Abstain.
Why do I sense a cartoon in this? So how the government passes law.
Where's Bill Barron when we need him?
Almost on the phone.
So,
Oh, he hears everything.
we have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oh, I didn't get a second. Second. All in favor, say aye. All right. Thank you.
All right. Onwards and upwards. Well, thanks a lot, Councilman. Thanks a lot, Councilwoman.